Imagine stepping out of the muddy, filthy streets of 14th century London and spotting the creaking tavern sign, a crude boar's head or bunch of grapes. The medieval tavern wasn't just a bar. It was the beating heart of community life, an unofficial town hall, stock exchange, and entertainment center, all gloriously chaotic. What hits you first isn't the sight, but the smell. A mailed fist of unwashed bodies, sour ale, and acrid smoke. The floor is usually packed earth covered in old, rotting rushes, a spongy, rich ecosystem of decomposing matter that hasn't been changed in months. You might crunch on vermin bones. The walls are wattle and daub, black with grease. Above, the low, smoke-blackened ceiling presses down, hung with dried herbs, garlic, and sides of bacon. The only real light comes from the massive hearth, casting dancing, sinister shadows. The air is thick enough to chew, making you cough and your eyes stream. As your senses adjust, you see the patrons. Merchants with calculating eyes, mud-caked soldiers, traveling pilgrims, and hard-faced locals who look like they grew from the floorboards. Their faces are written in scars, missing teeth, and eyes that had seen too much. Presiding over the chaos is the tavern keeper, a man of substantial girth and questionable morals whose word is swift, often brutal law. This establishment, whether an upscale inn, a middle-ground tavern originally for wine, or a simple alehouse run by an alewife, operates by its own dangerous rules. In the medieval world, alcohol was a necessity for survival, not just a luxury. Water, drawn from rivers and wells, was often a flowing cocktail of human waste and industrial runoff, making it lethally dangerous. The solution was ale, where the boiling process killed harmful bacteria. Thus, everyone drank it, from infants' weak small beer to the elderly, simply to stay alive and healthy. The ale was usually brewed by women, the alewives, and was thick, cloudy, and flavored with gruit, herbs, and spices instead of hops, and had to be consumed within days before it soured. Wine, imported and expensive, was a status symbol, often adulterated with cheaper alternatives, a fraud punishable by locking the tavern keeper in the pillory with the bad wine poured over his head. If the drink was questionable, the food was often downright dangerous. The main staple was pottage, a thick, perpetual stew kept simmering for days or even weeks, with new ingredients constantly added. This created a breeding ground for bacteria and a repository for ingredients of questionable origin. Meat, when available, was often tough, stringy, and well past its prime, sometimes from diseased or spoiled animals. Bread was usually coarse brown bread, sometimes used as a disposable plate called a trencher. Despite the hazards for many, the tavern meal was their only access to a hot, filling dish, making it an essential social and nutritional function. The tavern was populated by a rogues gallery that could turn a simple disagreement into bloodshed. Merchants, easily identified by their fine clothes, were targets for every thief. Soldiers, hardened by war and often suffering from modern-day PTSD, were the most volatile, with their casual attitude toward violence making them formidable opponents. Even pilgrims were not above suspicion. Chaucer's accounts reveal many using the pilgrimage as a cover for adventure or illicit business. Clergy were surprisingly common, often using their status to cover less holy activities like selling false indulgences. The tavern was populated by a rogues gallery that could turn a simple disagreement into bloodshed. Merchants, easily identified by their fine clothes, were targets for every thief. Soldiers, hardened by war and often suffering from modern-day PTSD, were the most volatile, with their casual attitude toward violence making them formidable opponents. Even pilgrims were not above suspicion. Chaucer's accounts reveal many using the pilgrimage as a cover for adventure or illicit business. Clergy were surprisingly common, often using their status to cover less holy activities like selling false indulgences. Women occupied a complex position, from the formidable alewives maintaining order to the serving wenches and prostitutes, who were vulnerable, yet often more ruthless than their male counterparts. The best thieves and cut-purses blended seamlessly, studying their victims before striking. The tavern keeper himself was often the most dangerous man, balancing the law by fencing stolen goods, providing alibis, and generally profiting from the chaos. In the tavern's flickering light, gambling was a way of life. The most popular game was hazard, an ancestor of modern craps, but dozens of games involving dice or cards were played. The dice were often loaded, shaved, or switched with sleight of hand. Cheating was an art form. Wagers were placed on anything from cockfighting and bear baiting to simple bets on which fly would reach the ceiling first. Winning too much marked a player as a cheat or a target, and losing too much could lead to instant violence or ruin. Violence in medieval taverns wasn't an aberration. It was an integral part of the social fabric. A perceived slight or a disputed debt instantly triggered a confrontation because honor was the most valuable currency. A man who backed down lost status, affecting his business and respect. Weapons were improvised, not just the knives carried by most patrons, but also heavy pewter tankards used as bludgeons, wooden stools as clubs, or pottery shards as cutting tools. Fighting styles were brutal and practical, aiming to kill or incapacitate quickly with grappling, biting, and aiming for eyes/groin. Wounds often led to death days later from infection, and the long-term consequences created cycles of revenge. In the upstairs rooms, prostitution was often a crucial part of the business model, providing income for the tavern keeper and services for customers. These women were frequently trapped by poverty or debt. While the church condemned it, the official view, famously attributed to St. Augustine, was that prostitution was like sewers in a palace, unpleasant but necessary to prevent worse corruption. This led to a mix of legal prohibition and unofficial tolerance, sometimes even municipal regulation. The working conditions were harsh, with little protection from violence and constant exposure to deadly sexually transmitted diseases and the risks of pregnancy. Prostitutes also served as informants for thieves, using their intimate contact to gather information on customers' wealth and habits, making them both victims and unwitting participants in the criminal underworld. Justice in the tavern was a complex, often contradictory affair. Official law was enforced by constables and bailiffs, but their power was limited and their resources often sparse. The church's canon law operated in parallel, imposing penances and fines for moral offenses. However, the most effective law was often the informal system enforced by the tavern keeper himself, who would settle disputes through negotiation, compensation, or even ritualized combat. Corruption was endemic, with officials accepting bribes to overlook illegal activities and tavern keepers paying protection money. As dawn broke, the true cost of the night was tallied. Bodies were removed, debts were collected, and reputations were rebuilt or abandoned. The cleanup wasn't just physical, but social. Alliances had to be renegotiated, and the fragile web of trust rewoven. The economic reckoning was immediate. Gambling debts had to be paid with penalties, sometimes impoverishing entire families. The tavern offered a form of escape from the grinding poverty and rigid social oppression of medieval life, a place where, for a moment, a peasant might drink with a nobleman, and luck could triumph over birth. But this escape came at the high cost of moral compromise and constant danger. The medieval tavern, despite its filth and violence, was a profoundly human institution. It was a mirror reflecting the entire spectrum of humanity, from the sublime connection to the calculated manipulation, and its essential role in meeting human needs ensured its survival.